expected to know as an educated English language teaching professional. And that's the difference between you and a native speaker off the street. They don't have any of that disciplinary knowledge. They may speak the language, but that's the only asset they have. So if we look at the curriculum of graduate programs, those are the sort of things that you see in them. The other kind of knowledge, however, is the knowledge that actually informs teaching. That's called pedagogical content knowledge. That's the knowledge you draw upon in planning lessons and thinking about how to teach this reading lesson, how to explain this grammar item to students, and so on. That is what we call pedagogical content knowledge, knowledge that actually supports teaching. So there's a big debate, and there always has been, in the academic field as to what really constitutes the essential knowledge base. Where does it come from? Should it come from linguistics? Should it come from psychology? Should it come from education? And so on. And people that I interact with often have very heated differences of opinion about that issue. I remember when I was faculty at the University of Hawaii, and we had a reading room that the students shared with students from the linguistics department. So we put books in there which we wanted them to read, and they were organized into different sections on this and that, and we even had some literature there as well. And I remember some books of Steve Krashen came in, and we had a little discussion saying, which section should these go into? And somebody said, I think they should go into the fiction section. Give an indication of some of the issues people talk about. Now, somebody with a good basis in pedagogical content knowledge should be better informed to make the sort of decisions that you have to do on a daily basis in the classroom. That's the purpose of it. Why know it if you can't use it? And so these are the sort of things that pedagogical content knowledge should enable you to do. These practical decisions that come up every day. Now you may know the, did you say there's somebody from Cambridge ESOL here? Yeah, because Cambridge ESOL, that's the sort of testing branch of Cambridge, have developed a knowledge test for teachers who are new to teaching. It's not a test that develops your practical skills, it's a test that provides a core body of content knowledge. It's called the Teacher Knowledge Test. And so TKT, that's quite widely taught, it's available online in various centers, probably in Korea as well. And that's an attempt to provide people who are new to teaching, who haven't had a chance to study the, if you like, the pedagogical theories and so on that inform teaching. That's the TKT. I think there are 4 or 5 modules, is that right? Yeah. 3, is it? Okay, so pedagogical content knowledge should enable you to make these kinds of decisions more appropriately. Interestingly, in the discipline that we're in, there's not a lot of research on this. You know, thousands of students have to do courses on this and that, but there's not much follow-up to see what's the impact of that. Let me just give you a quick example. A couple of years ago in Singapore, the Ministry of Education tested teachers on how much they knew about grammar. So they were English teachers. They were given a little test to do. They knew the difference between the finite and non-finite verbs and all this kind of thing. It was found that a lot of them didn't know a lot, and so they were required to do a 100-hour in-service course on grammar. They weren't too excited about that, you can imagine. But since then, there's been no impact studies to look at. Did that course actually influence the practical work that they have to do? So that's one of the things we're bad at is doing follow-up to see what use teachers make of the knowledge we give them. Now here's an example of a student of mine in Hong Kong who wanted to look at the impact of content knowledge. And she was in the Hong Kong context where English literature is also taught as part of the English language curriculum. And what she did was she worked with 2 groups of teachers. One group had done a course on literature, the other group had not. Apart from that, they were more or less at the same level of training. They were bachelor's majoring in English teaching. She gave them a folder. Each group was given a folder, and these folders contained examples of literary texts, readings, poems, little snippets of one sort or the other. And they were asked to look at these texts and say, do you see any potential of these in the language classroom? How would you use them? So, and here's what she found. And you'll see there that those teachers who did have a background in relevant content knowledge, in this case literature, were able to look at those texts and see a lot of potential in them. They just didn't see them as examples of language that they could use for practicing grammar and practicing reading and so on. You'll see there that they were able to look at the text and to deal with any difficulties they posed. They saw lots of possibilities in them. When they looked at them, they could look at the literary aspects of the text, looking at things like metaphor and so on. Whereas those who had not done the course on literature just saw them as examples of language to be used for teaching comprehension. So the point about that is this is an example of where content knowledge made a difference, and we hope that it does when we run workshops for teachers. We hope that the information that we give them will make a difference. Now, coming now to teaching skills, the actual command of those behaviors and skills that you need to navigate your way through a lesson. That's what we have to acquire very early on in our career as teachers. Ways of doing these kinds of things which occur in every lesson. Sorry, I went too quick there. So we normally call these skills. They are the behaviors or actions, if you like, that we acquire or we learn through experience, but often through an initial pre-service, like certificate level training program. So teachers, of course, have to acquire these skills fairly early on, and over time these skills become sort of automatic. In other words, they don't require a great deal of conscious thought after you have internalized routines and strategies for doing them. You do them automatically, and one of the things you notice about experienced teachers is they can cope with all sorts of situations very quickly because they have the repertoire of skills and solutions that they can access and call up very quickly. They can change direction, if you like, change the grouping arrangement, focus an activity differently, build in more language support, and so on. Now, one of the questions was, how do inexperienced and experienced teachers differ in the use of their teaching skills? There's a very good book by my colleague Simon Borg, who's written about this recently and looked at how expert teachers have a wide repertoire of routines. They're willing to depart from established procedures. They learn to automatize routines associated with management and so on. They improvise more. And so this comes back to this notion of improv teaching as an improvisational performance, so that good teachers may have a lesson plan in mind, may have an idea in mind, may have some content they want to cover, but then the lesson takes over and the dynamics and the online decision making that comes up shapes the way the lesson is delivered. So expert teachers are able to teach efficiently and effectively because they have these skills, but they are also able to improvise. I've got a study or two I've done on these in one of my papers that you can read on the website. So that's one of the things that experience gives. We ask, what's the difference between a teacher with 10 years experience and a teacher with 1 year's experience? Well, in some cases, unfortunately, 10 years experience is 1 year's experience repeated 10 times. So, however, if experience is to serve as a source of learning, it has to be informed by this process of internalizing and making these routines automatic, if you like, so that the teacher can look to the bigger picture, how can I make my lessons more engaging for learners, and so on. Looking at the bigger picture, that's what expert teachers are able to do. The fourth issue is really what I started with when I talked about the fact that teaching is a situated activity, that Korean teachers, Korean schools work differently from American schools and so on. And what works in one context may not work in another. And so a teacher may be very confident and have done well in one situation, one school moves to another school, finds things don't work quite the same way. So when we work in a school, we have to become socialized into the culture of that school. How does that school work? What are the power structures? What are the patterns of decision-making and control that operate within that school and also within that classroom? And that is often culturally determined. And so learning to teach means learning to teach in a specific context, learning to teach in a classroom with young learners, in a secondary school classroom. And those of you who've moved, as I did once, from secondary to primary school teaching to secondary school teaching will realize what a dramatic change that often can be and how difficult that can be because of the different predispositions that young high school kids bring to learning. So when those of us who move to new cultures, as many of the foreign teachers I see here have done, have to really start learning all over again, don't we? To think, what does it mean to be an English teacher, a foreign teacher in Korea, in a Korean school, in a Korean community? All of these kinds of things come up. What are community attitudes towards learning English? So these then are the sorts of dimensions of contextual knowledge that are important and that in an indirect way can often influence the success of teaching and learning. Because, just this business of students' expectations, because, you know, I've been doing some interviews with RO on TV, and they sent me some of the questions, and they're the usual kind of things like, you know, why don't Korean students want to learn English, and this sort of thing that you know, you have to realize that not everybody needs English. I have a Korean partner, and the family that I meet, most of them don't speak any English. They have no need to speak English. They'll never need English in their lives. So, you know, the idea that everyone's desperate to learn English is a fantasy. It's a fiction. A lot of people get by in life in this world without knowing a word of English. Now, we are servicing those who do need English, but let's not imagine that our goal is to turn every Korean into a bilingual speaker of English. You know, so students' expectations are often conditioned by that. They know, looking at auntie and uncle, a successful businessman, they don't speak a word of English, and yet they're millionaires. So we need to be realistic about what our students' understanding of English is. What does English mean to them? What's the image of English, if you like, that they have in their minds? And it's not necessarily the one that we present through our textbooks, which we write on the expectation that everybody wants to develop a high level of communicative proficiency. So these then are the, if you like, the